and it is called Confusion Nawa, which is actually inspired by a song from Delakuti, or Confusion. And it's a 2013 dark comedy directed by Kenneth Gyang. It follows a group of strangers whose lives become intertwined over the course of 24 hours in a northern Nigerian city. The action is kicked off when petty thieves Charles and Chichi stumble across the mobile phone of businessman Emeka and demand he pay a ransom for it. The film is lively, goofy, and fun, boasting a great soundtrack and occasional moments of pathos. It reminded me a lot of the 90s films like Pulp Fiction and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which also feature this kind of intersecting ensemble of criminals and oddballs who spout witty and often metatextual dialogue. And to me, Confusion Nawa was really about the chaos and the frequent misunderstandings of modern life, and how the actions of one person ripple outwards and affect everyone else. And I think thematically, I think there's some similarity between this and IMO, but this is a much lighter and much funner version of that story. But I really enjoyed it. I found it fun, and it's probably the first comedy in this, the movie Passport series, that I've actually enjoyed. The other ones I didn't quite vibe with, but this was quite fun, and I enjoyed the characters. But what
Do you think it's
Bina?
because, yeah, I mean, I'm the same. Like, I think comedy is the hardest to translate, right, to different cultures. It's so culturally specific, whereas drama and documentary are easier to translate. I did enjoy it, and I'm glad you mentioned Lock, Stock, because I found it very Guy Ritchie-esque. And maybe that's why I found it quite funny, because although it was a Nigerian film, it felt very kind of comfortable to watch. Like, it's something I was very familiar with. And it also, I mean, the whole discussion about The Lion King really reminded me of Clerks, and the discussion about Return of the Jedi. I just thought it was hilarious when they're teasing the guy singing down his phone, "Can you feel the love tonight?" and all that. I mean, I was literally like laughing out loud in my lounge, which very few English and American films do for me, let alone a Nigerian one. And it is this. Sorry.
Oh, it was so good. No, just as soon as he says, "The Lion King is a neo-colonial propaganda," I'm like, yes, go off, King. just this, just this weed-smoking college student, just going off in a film class. So good.
I know, and it's just and even when they get like thrown in jail and they've given their names as like the characters from Lion King, it's a brilliant conceit, and it gives it such joy and verve. But then there are moments, like you say. I mean, in some ways it's a tragic film, because these two hustlers are trapped in the same economic system that's trapped the characters in IMOF, and they're making choices that are going to lead to some tragedy as well, and they are trapped, and they have a sense of humor about it. And again, you see that class split, right? The very middle class cheating husband versus the sort of working class hustlers who are kind of forced into the underworld of just trying to sort of make a living or scratch a living. And I love films where you can have a bit of both, and I think it's always really hard to handle. Like, it's a very hard thing, right, to combine comedy and pathos. And I found it really hilarious. This is, if you like this, there are quite a few like modern Hollywood films that are quite good like this. And I really love the bits of Nigerian film that I've watched, because they do embrace a kind of larger than life, character driven comedy, and just like way too much plot for anyone's own good. It gives it this sort of chaotic feel. But I had great fun with this, and I was pleasantly surprised to see it on Netflix. It was like, yay, this is good.
And it blends tone quite well. Like, 'cause the first sections do feel like, that kind of fast-paced Hollywood kind of ensemble action comedy. The really sort of witty sort of back and forths. But then it'll switch into like these very melodramatic scenes between the husbands and wife, when one of them realizes the other one's cheating, and it'll zoom in on the shock. Like, it just felt like like a soap opera at that point. Or when the father is like thinking that his son might be gay, and he looks over at his son sitting next to a boy, and he's just the look of horror. Like, it was just so campy and silly. And there's some jokes are really goofy and silly, and some are quite witty, and it's a nice mix of styles.
Yeah, but you definitely see the influence of watching some of those late sort of early 2000s Guy Ritchie films. And
I had a look to see what other films were like this, and apparently they have a name, and it's called the hyperlink and it dates back to it's a complex or multi-linear narrative structure with multiple characters under one unifying theme. That's the Wikipedia definition, so don't cite me. But it dates back to like Rules of the Game, Nashville. There was a lot of comedies in the 90s, Richard Linklater films, Guy Ritchie, Tarantino,
Pulp
Spike Lee.
Fiction, City of God, Days.
Do the right things, sort of similar. Love Actually.
Yeah.
And then the serious things like Alejandro Gonzalez Inarritu, Babel, and all that. But it is this kind of, it's usually a city drama, and it's called hyperlink because I think it's sort of like one character will sort of have a sort of connection to another character, and that's how the narrative sort of jumps between. That one person will be related, or one person's actions will affect another, so it kind of builds this sort of dense web of a world, a sort of cause and effect narrative. So it's
there was definitely a moment, wasn't there? So it feels like when you look on IMDb's got a list of the best hyperlink movies, and it starts with Pulp Fiction. But in the 2000s has a lot, right? Snatch, Traffic. I mean, Lock, Stock, late 90s, Magnolia, 99, City of God, 2002, and Morris Parish, 2000. It feels like late 90s, early 2000s was like the peak of this genre in the West, anyway. Crash. Do you remember when Crash won the Oscar and everyone was shocked, and Brokeback did in 2004?
Outrageous.
I know. There you go. Yeah, amazing. It really is like a moment, isn't it, of cinema history. Well, thank you for giving me that definition. I did not know that was a thing, but it makes total sense.
Yeah, so I think it is taking inspiration from that Hollywood style or from that British action comedy style. But I guess I'm interested in what makes it specifically like Nigerian. What are some of the Nigerian themes or ideas that sort of separate it from Hollywood?
Well, I mean, the setting. I mean, Lagos is so alive. It's so visceral, and the chaos of it, but also just the circumstances, right? The idea that the way the justice system works, the way the police system works, this idea of the nature of the criminality is very different to what you find in Lock, Stock, even though that's in the same milieu, but in London. But there is and also the humor it feels like it's a broader. The metatextual stuff's there, but it does feel like it embraces more the sort of gonzo broad humour than maybe an equivalent British movie would. So I feel there's enough of it. But like I said, to me, this is the kind of like the multifaceted flow of ideas back and forth, because it's obviously taking. You can imagine they made this in 2014. That the filmmakers 10 years prior were watching as teenagers, like hyper cinema sensitive teenagers, some of the films coming in and getting influenced, but then still keeping some of that Nigerian element, which is really lovely, and then giving it back to us 10 years later.
Well, apparently, like Quentin Tarantino, prior to being a filmmaker, Kenneth Gyang worked a video store.
This does not surprise me at all.
They were both kind of weaned on popular cinema.
Yeah, you could just
and it has that postmodern metatextual, like we're aware of cinema and we're going to talk about it and discuss that. I
would bet he's watched Clerks, the other film about people working in a video store and talking about other films. And so the circle of life is complete.
I've never heard anyone call it Clerks. That's interesting.
Yeah, like that conversation about The Lion King, two mates talking about Lion King, is exactly the two guys talking about Return of the Jedi in Clerks.
Yeah. But definitely there's a preoccupation on civil corruption and bureaucracy, and it seems to be a lot more casual criminality in this film. Like even Lock, Stock, the criminals were, there was a sense in which the police were around and they had to keep it on the lowdown. But in this film, the only time the police show up is to enforce a curfew. The rest of the time, they're kind of given free rein. And
it's probably more similar to Snatch, actually, then, if you want to look at Guy Ritchie, because Snatch is a film that just feels very absent the rule of law. It's just criminals dealing with criminals, and it's criminals policing criminals. Like, you didn't play by the rules of the criminal game, so now I'm going to come and wreak vengeance, sort of thing.
And the butt of the joke is the office worker, the one guy who's trying to do things by the book, and is the open corruption happens at his office. No one respects him. He's not rewarded for doing everyone else's work. He's been mocked for it. So it shows perhaps how that criminality is tolerated. The one guy is trying to do things by the book is it fails when he might be the hero of another film.
I agree. I really enjoyed this, actually, and it was a really interesting mix of films. We had a very serious, like, neo-realist drama. We had a music-oriented political doc, And then we had this really fun, almost like a caper movie, but with a bit of like realism in there at times. It was like a really lovely
Yeah.
mix, unintended, like not deliberately, but yeah, well
Yeah,
done.
no, I'm happy.
Curating
Like
that.
often there'll be one that's not as enjoyable as the others, but these were all nice, and this
Yeah.
even Confusion Now was quite fun and light. Like it wasn't dragging at all. It was enjoyable, and I thought it was. Last point I'll make is that it was interesting how it kind of fell between the sort of different movements of Nollywood film, because IMOFA was very much of that new Nollywood cinema where it's very austere and very technically proficient, great actors, all the high budget. Obviously, it looks beautiful. Whereas Confusion Now was made on a shoestring budget, like a lot of the Nollywood films did before it, but it's got so much love and passion poured into it that it rises above its grassroots and just
Yeah.
really works because of all the talent involved.